Everyone deserves a second chance, right? If you're the individuals tasked with discipline in K through 12, that's likely not an option you're laying on the table for a youth with a behavioral outburst. These outbursts are often criminalized in K through 12 institutions, leading to devastating incarceration of youth. As a previous Clark County School District student in Southern Nevada and an emerging policy scholar, I've explored some possible policy solutions and hope to prevent some that may mitigate the impacts of youth incarceration. First off, I'll explore the relationship between youth incarceration and Southern Nevada, then the lack of proactive disciplinary measures that often cause the school to prison pipeline, and then propose a new behavioral plan and solution for CCSD and other neighboring school districts to adopt. First, let's explore youth incarceration as it exists in Southern Nevada. The juvenile justice system in Southern Nevada has vast impacts on youth in the region, leading to long-term negative consequences. In the state of Nevada, according to the ACLU, 226 to 300 per 100,000 youth are incarcerated. That's approximately 0.25% of all youth in Nevada imprisoned at any given time. In addition to this frightening statistic, the youth in the state of Nevada are also subject to cruel and unusual punishment, being housed in adult facilities. According to the Nevada Department of Health and Human Services, children as young as the age of 13 are legally allowed to be confined in adult facilities, given that they can be sentenced as an adult in the court of law. Youth of color in Southern Nevada are also represented disproportionately in the Nevada juvenile justice system, causing considerable concern. The Nevada Juvenile Justice Commission's 2018 report, with the data indicated on the screen now, indicated this drastic disparity. With the population of white, black, and Latino students being 40%, 10, and 41% in Clark County, seen on the pie chart on the left, and the proportion of detained youth of the same respective racial categories being 19, 41, and 34%, seen on the right, of those detained. This displays the significant impact of youth incarceration on families of color. Another important aspect of this policy is as it relates to policing in K-12 institutions. Minority students especially feel targeted and triggered by school police officer presence in K-12 institutions. In fact, 2 out of 5 demand the end to school police, saying they feel unsafe, according to Jeremy Chen at KUNV. Lastly, to better contextualize youth incarceration in Southern Nevada, it's important to recognize the impacts. The average operating cost of one youth facility for just one youth is $200,000 per individual, according to the ACLU. This alone has considerable ramifications for the state, not even taking into account what the Children and Family Justice Center at Northwestern University considers the $4.7 trillion lost long-term revenue nationally due to youth incarceration. The establishment of a said system of incarceration for young people seems to have one clear cause: a consistently authoritarian approach to discipline. The systems of discipline in K-12 often remove discussion of behavioral problems as an option on the table and institute strong-handed punishments that fail to address underlying issues. School discipline in the state has long been approached as a way to remove problematic students from a school and put them off out of sight. This might be a home, another alternative campus, or relocating them even to a prison. With a Google search, Southern Nevada has 10 behavioral schools located predominantly in Las Vegas Valley. These behavioral schools are often rife with problematic situations, including, as one student cites from the Las Vegas Review Journal's information, drug trafficking, gang violence, and frequent fights. An important facet of this discussion is also the rate at which policing is increasing in K-12 institutions. As previously stated, students in general have a disliking of school police, especially those of color. This relationship makes it difficult for behavioral systems to be approached properly. More broadly, the use of school police does not have any expressible positive impact. According to Ryan King and Mark Schindler from the Brookings Institution, school police have nationally been linked to increased arrest for non-criminal activity, and this fuels the school-to-prison pipeline undoubtedly. Part of ignoring the need for professional psychological assistance and behavioral services is also the general lack of school mental health practitioners. In CCSD, as you can see on the screen now, there are approximately 1 school psychologist for every 2,000 students, and this is according to Nevada Public Radio, something that's also corroborated by the CCSD's annual budget. According to the National Association for School Psychologists, an organization that's tasked with the review and recommendation of standards of practice for school psychology, there should be approximately one school psychologist per 500 students, an extreme disproportion relationship between the national recommendation and the Nevada supply, as you can see on the screen now. Lastly, to better connect problem to cause, it's important to examine the relationship between mental health and children in K-12 institutions. According to Clark County Children's Mental Health Consortium in 2021, Nevada has remained at dead last in providing youth mental health services. And this is an important problem to consider, especially when the majority of youth, 75% according to the Center for Study of Social Policy, get all their social services for mental health in K-12 institutions. And that is incredibly important to recognize. Additionally, there's an established connection between unaddressed mental health concerns and imprisonment, and that relates directly to having a lack of psychologists in schools. According to the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, approximately 66% of youth in prison currently have unaddressed mental illnesses, compared to the just 9 to 25% that exist in the general youth population. This system, which reinforces a lack of mental health services and endorses high rates of violence over addressing behavioral concerns, deserves a well-constructed solution. In order to combat growing concerns regarding youth incarceration and school violence, this discipline, and also the fueling the school-to-prison pipeline, Clark County School District and related Southern Nevada institutions must prioritize professional mental health staff. The solution is multifaceted. CCSD spent $18 million on school police officers in 2018 and 2019. That's a 9% growth over the previous year and is the largest increase in expenditures for any group of professional staff that CCSD employs. In order to better examine this, we could potentially divest funding from school police into school psychological help, and over a 3-year period, examine the rates of school behavioral discipline with school police and then with psychological services, and determine truly if there might be a better solution than school police officers. And evidence from a variety of reputable sources, including the National Institute for Health, indicate that school mental health professionals actually develop more beneficial environments for students. School psychologists must also be integrated into these school discipline programs. At Mack Middle School, they've utilized Hope Square Fundings, a program that CCSD launched to redirect funding from behavioral schools, and they've used it quite proactively in order to effectively address school psychological concerns and also behavior beyond expelling, suspending, and behavioral schools referrals, and then often incarceration. A common rebuttal is that there simply aren't enough school psychologists, and I think it's important to recognize. In order to combat this issue as it relates, CCSD must work in conjunction with related higher ed institutions like UNLV, CSN, Nevada State to incentivize school psychology. Paying part of tuition or offering incentives for students that major in psychology with an interest in going into K-12 must be a way to incentivize and meet that demand as it remains incredibly high. The relationships here between youth incarceration and mental health are pretty obvious, and they require real-world practical solutions. In conclusion, youth incarceration causes considerable damages to youth, and especially for their potential for success, much of which is caused by reactive discipline instead of proactive. We need to legitimately address mental health needs that could honestly be fixed in a classroom or school environment. I implore those listening to consider the evaluation of school mental health professionals comparative to their school police counterparts. I urge Clark County School District to adopt policies that encourage school psychologists to join K-12 institutions. Mental health for youth is unimaginably important.